Hey everyone, welcome to episode 53 of the Austin Downbeat. I'm Kat, your host. Thanks so much for watching. I have a great interview and conversation today with Mike Meadows. But first, let's get to the rundown so you can see there's a lot of people playing. So we're going to go through this quickly. But this is who's playing, some of who's playing in Austin, May 9th through the 15th. Here we go. On the 9th, Susanna Schaffel is at Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. Also, Rosie Flores is up at the Continental Club Gallery. On the 10th, you have Kelly McWee at Seaboys. Michelle Malone is at the O4 Center. On the 11th, you have Pack doing their weekly thing at Saxon Pub, free show. You have Buffalo Hunt at Feels So Good. The ever present but social media elusive Scrappy Judd Newcomb is at the Continental Club. Joe James is at Geraldine's, and Ruthie Kraft is at the Rustic Tap. That's all on the 11th. On the 12th, you have John Fulbright at Saxon Pub. You have my pal Ray Prim at So Far Sounds. Pussy Gillette is at the Lost Well. Madame Radar is over at Pootie's Hilltop Roadhouse. And Nick Parr and the Selfless Lovers are at Seaboys. Great place to see them. On the 13th, you have to go check out a Peggy Hanna show. So the Bell Sounds are at Peggy's on the Ledge. Ginger Lee is at Saxon Pub. Ian Moore is at Antone's. On the 14th, you have Dave Scher at Hi Hat Public House. Sour Bridges is at Central Machine Works. And last but not least, our Monday night residencies. Pat Byrne is now starting to play every Monday night at the Saxon Pub. Bob Schneider's doing his thing at Saxon that night. You have Monday Night Supper Club at El Mercado South. And you have Brian Wolf at the Driscoll. There are so many people playing. I did a little more than I usually do, but so many more. So be sure to check out your favorite musicians, check out bands in town, check out wherever you go find your shows. All right, let's dig in. Mike Meadows is my guest today. He is a Grammy-nominated multi-instrumentalist, percussion, creator of drum things. Really fascinating guy. We have a really wonderful conversation. He has his first ever solo debut project called My Best Daydream. The title of that album is called Faults and Flaws. And you can head over to his website at meadowsdrums.com to check out the Bandcamp link because it's fully and only available on Bandcamp. So be sure to, we love Bandcamp around here. So be sure to support him on that. Check out our conversation here. It's a good one. Just when I think he's done, he adds another layer of amazing knowledge and things he's learned, and really, really quite fascinating story. I thoroughly enjoyed talking with him, getting to know him, and I think you will too. So without further ado, here is Mike Meadows.
All right.
Welcome to the show, Mike Meadows. So happy to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. I've been looking forward to this. I saw you play what feels like a long time ago at Antone's with Hayes Carll. I think obviously you guys were the headliner. I could try to think like who opened for you, but you guys were the headliner. Maybe you didn't even have an opener, but I remember seeing you there.
Was this sometime in the last few years?
Yeah. I would have been like probably like two within the last 2 years.
Okay, yeah, we did 3 nights in a row and we had a different opener every night. So I don't
Oh,
know
okay.
which night it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember my eye always kind of went to you because you do so many things, which is one of the things that we're going to talk about. Honestly, like I don't usually take a ton of notes, but I was like, I can't, I gotta stop it somewhere. Because the amount of things that you do, the list of people that you've played with, your side interests that have nothing to do with music.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like we're just gonna crack the surface in this one. We'll have to do a few interviews with you. But How many instruments do you actually play? That's,
Oh, oh goodness.
I mean, have you ever counted or said like, I wonder how many you play?
I have not ever counted or really thought about it. Do you want to know the brief history of where it started and what developed?
Yeah. I want to kind of, it feels like you are absolutely in love with sound because of just watching you play in person is definitely an experience. And then all the instruments that you play, and then you have that the cinematic synesthesia volume 1, which really plays with sound. So take us back to the beginning and kind of fill us in on how it started. I know it started early for you.
Very early,
Very
yes.
early. Little 5-year-old Mike Meadows.
Yeah, so I guess starting, I don't know, when I was 2 or something like that, I started begging my parents to play the drums. Like I was obsessed with drums. Anytime I saw it or like any, would hear it, I was like, I want to play the drums. And my parents wisely said, "Oh, well, if you want to learn the drums, you need to learn the piano first because the piano is the foundation of Western music."
Mhm.
So the earliest I could start taking piano lessons was 3. So at 3, I started taking piano lessons.
Wow.
And I learned how to read and how to play scales and, play little songs and stuff. And so did that for a couple of years, but I still really wanted to play drums. So at 5, I asked him again, you know, can I play drums? And I've been practicing, but I really want to do this other thing. And that's when they took me on an audition for the Atlanta Boy Choir. I didn't know it was an audition. They just said, you're going to go sing with some people and see how you like it. And because I already had been doing some piano, and my piano teacher had also told him that I had perfect pitch, which I don't have perfect pitch, but I have pretty good pitch.
Mhm.
But at that point in time, they were like, yeah, you know. So I went and I auditioned. I got in. I was like, I love singing. So then I was taking piano lessons and then singing and going to rehearsal every week. And this is 5. So
Wow.
then at 9, again, I said, hey, I've been practicing piano, I've been singing, going to rehearsals. Um, can I still would really love to play the drums. They were like, oh, what do you think about violin or saxophone or trumpet? I was like, trumpet's pretty cool. So I started taking trumpet lessons with a guy at Kennesaw State University. Um, and so then I'm studying piano, singing, and trumpet at the same time. Then my big break came when I was about 11. The kid that played the little drummer boy part during the Christmas season, Hans, his voice was starting to crack, and so I was like, "This is my in. He's not going to be here next season, and they're going to have auditions for the little drummer boy. This is how I get to play the drums." So I convinced my parents to let me start studying drums, and it was only classical percussion. And I studied with a guy at Kennesaw State University who was in played percussion for the Atlanta Ballet and symphony and stuff. And I was like, I need to learn this to get my foot in the door. And I did.
Smart.
It worked. I became the drummer boy at 11. And that was like foot in the door, here we go. And it just sort of took off from there. Like eventually, you know, started getting into I didn't have a drum set for a long time. Like I wanted to play like drum set, but first I saved up and I got a hi-hat. And so then I had a hi-hat and a snare drum. And then eventually got a drum set, and then I'm in high school and then I start playing in bands and
Yeah.
continued the trumpet and the singing and all that through that. With the boy choir, like I started touring with them when I was 9. We do Europe every summer for about a
Wow.
month, and playing all these amazing venues. It was, an incredible experience. at the time I didn't realize it was anything different. That, it's like go play sports and go to school, and then in the summer I go tour Europe and play a bunch of old venues, like crazy cathedrals and symphony halls and stuff.
That's crazy.
And and then eventually I started playing in bands, and later in life I picked up some new instruments. Over the pandemic, I picked up new instruments. Like,
Which ones over the pandemic? Crucial
bass. I
part.
learned how to play bass guitar, which I had never played before.
Nice.
And I got into lap steel guitar as well, learning how to
Very
play that.
cool. That's kind of a hot, a lot of I had Jeff Blankenhorn on the show, um, and well, it's a little bit, is it different than no, he's lap steel,
He's
right?
got a thing called the plank that he created.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But similar sound, right?
it's a similar thing to a dobro or to a.
Yeah. I feel like the guys that can really, or girls that can really play that are in high demand. And if you're good, like, you'll get a call.
Yeah. I wouldn't say I'm good, but
I'm sure you are.
I can just do little things, for recordings. Like I'll do sort of ambient textures with it, or little lines. So it's
Yeah.
nothing I would attempt to play live, but for
Yet.
recording purposes,
I feel
yes,
like you'll get there.
maybe one day.
Awesome. And then um did you did it did you still kind of, because it sounds like for percussion your real foundation was more classical, did you feel a pull of like, "Ooh, I really want to do the rock thing," or because that's
Oh,
mainly
100%.
what you do now, right? Is more obviously, the antithesis of the classical.
Yeah, I grew up in the classical world, pretty hardcore. I mean, with the Atlanta Boy Choir, like uh, at that time in the '80s, like we didn't really do much in the U.S. except for stuff locally in Atlanta, but in Europe, we were like superstars. Like it was like,
Wow.
go perform at the Vatican and meet Pope John Paul II, and
What?
yeah, several heads of state, like met Henry Kissinger at the U.S. Embassy in Paris on the 4th of July. Um, would do the Opera House in Vienna, sold out, like all kinds of crazy stuff. And it was at a very high level. The first recording I ever did was Benjamin Britten's War Requiem with the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra. And Robert Shaw was the conductor for that. And they brought a few of us from the boy choir in. It was really cool, actually. There were only maybe like 15 of us, or less. And they had us placed way up in the lighting booth in the Atlanta Symphony Hall,
Oh, wow.
because in the Fauré's Requiem, the boy choir part is supposed to sound like angels singing down.
Oh,
And
cool.
so the symphony is down below, and they had us up really high and had us physically high and singing down, and they had planks of wood over the seating so that it would bounce around. And so it had that quality of really made it sound like that. And that recording actually won 2 Grammys. So
Wow.
yeah,
Wow.
I was like 11 or 12, something like that.
What did your brain at 11 or 12 think of that, with all the kind of growth that's happening inside of you as a musician? What's happening in your head as you're sort of like not only experiencing it in real time, but also just sort of like conceptualizing what's happening? And then does that plug into sort of, oh, okay, this is helping to shape me on what I want to do with my life?
um I didn't realize it until later. At the time it was just, we're
Fun.
going in, we're gonna sing this thing, and don't mess up.
Right.
It was
Fair.
highly competitive. We had to memorize everything. We had to be it was extremely disciplined, and it had to be perfect. And if it wasn't, then not only was it frowned upon by the director, the conductor, but also by your fellow singers, right?
Yeah.
So a bunch of boys are competitive, and it's like,
Right.
you sang a wrong note, or you didn't memorize this. and we weren't allowed to ever bring music home, so we had to memorize it during rehearsals.
Wow.
So you couldn't take it home and memorize it. We had, but at 9 we had 2 hours on Tuesdays and 4 hours on Saturday morning. So we were rehearsing 6 hours a week, and in that time frame you had to memorize. And it was a thing to like, okay, who can sing this without looking at it now, you know?
Mm.
And so it was competitive to remember stuff. These things later in life, looking back, I realized that that has served me well. Like I can learn things extremely fast, and I can remember stuff that I played, 10, 15 years ago, and then somebody calls me up again to play with them, and oh yeah, I remember this. Here it is, and I think that's because of that training that my brain was wired to do that, to just quickly remember as much information as possible and with precision, you know.
Wow.
Um, Later in life, like growing up in the classical thing wasn't what I really wanted to do, but I enjoyed it. What I loved was, the Beatles and Led Zeppelin and the Beach Boys and Motown, like, and eventually I got there. Like I played in like funk bands and R&B soul bands, and growing up in Atlanta, there was all kinds of music. People don't think of Atlanta as a big music town, but it really is.
It really is.
If you start thinking about artists that have come out of there, it's like you have things like the Indigo Girls, to the
Mhm.
Black Crows, to Usher, to the Outcast. I mean, there's such a thriving hip hop scene and then there's tons of metal stuff like Seven Dust. Those guys were from Atlanta. It's like kind of all the things are there, and
Mhm.
it was really cool to have access and to be exposed to so many different types of music and to have the
Mhm.
opportunity to play that as a teenager.
Yeah. Sometimes with classically trained artists, there sometimes, maybe not always, is a little bit of a box that they have to kind of learn to climb out of when they're performing. Did you find that that was how it was for you, in the sense of, where once you get to where you are now and you're on stage and you're not just a musician in the craft of being a musician, but you're also an artist and a performer, you sort of have to throw it away a bit, right? Is there a, how big is the chasm between those two things for you, having that classical background?
um well, so with the classical stuff, like I think the main thing is a lot of times classically trained musicians are so used to having the piece of paper in front of them and reading music, and they learn to read music really well and
Mhm.
to interpret certain things, but only if it's written a certain way.
Right.
And I kind of early on was more into learning improvisation and picking up by ear. And so, like I said, when I first got my hi-hat and I had just a hi-hat and a snare drum, then I'd play along with records or like be learning Led Zeppelin stuff and copying John Bonham even with just a hi-hat and a snare, and kind of,
Mm.
hitting my foot on the ground and starting to learn that stuff. And I believe one of the coolest things to me about music is there's an endless amount of types of music all around the world. I still discover new instruments that I've never even thought of
Mhm.
to this day. Like every day, I feel like there's, oh wow, this is something like one of my favorite things on Instagram is from Dust to Digital, where
Yeah.
they put up all these cool things of, whether it's people just doing stuff with their hands or if it's like, and a lot of those things I've seen in those places, but then there's always new things to be discovered, and it's an endless well. And there's also a lot of different ways into it. And with classical music, it's about learning technique and learning the written Western language. And this is Western classical music. And then, you learn about jazz and improvisation and learning to read charts, and then also learning to pick up things by ear and rock and roll and stuff that has nothing to do with reading. Like when I learned to play guitar, I didn't learn how to read music on guitar, and I wasn't looking at stuff. I just learned chords from friends, and
Right.
then would start figuring out stuff, and somebody would show me a pentatonic scale, and then you start having knowledge of music theory, which is useful,
Yeah.
and how things work together, and so a lot of that stuff I learned in a different way. And
Hmm.
then also, I've spent a lot of time in Africa studying with different masters there, and they're not showing you written music. It's literally like, you know, play this, and then you copy that, and then they
Right.
say no because there's some subtle thing that you aren't getting yet. And so you sit there for a whole day just trying to like get one hit right, and then finally they're
Mm.
like, yes. And then you're like, I'm not sure what
Finally.
I did differently, but
Yeah.
and you get into the nuance of stuff, and things over there too, like the shift in the time and the way things stretch, or the difference in pitch is not the same as what we're used to, like on a scale of a piano. It's like things could be tonally different, and maybe they're just relative to each other, but not in this standardized tuning.
Yeah.
Learning to think of music in different terms, and also processing and learning in those traditional ways.
Yeah.
And I've spent a lot of time learning not just classical, but then jazz, and then rock, and then all these different world music cultures, and studying Indian classical music, which for rhythmic stuff, for example, you learn to say the sounds before you learn to play them.
Mhm.
Right? Those
Oh,
relate to certain sounds that you play on different instruments, and so you learn how to say it before you learn how to play it.
wow. I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
yeah, it's really cool, and it's a very evolved and complicated systems that they've created
Mhm.
that are thousands of years old. And same thing with stuff in Africa, and they're very different. Africa is more polyrhythmic, and things together and joined together, and um,
Mhm.
the Indian stuff is more just two or three or four people in an ensemble, and everybody sort of has their part. And
Mhm.
Indian classical music, they don't have harmony, they don't have chords. It's all about the movement through the scale and the revelation of what the scale is.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
Yeah, so you don't ever hear harmonic, like intentional chords in
Yeah.
Indian classical music. Like on sitar and sarod, you'll have a
Mhm.
drone and things that relate to that drone, but no defined chords. But
Like you have a soil, like a bed, and then things just kind of relate to the foundational.
yes, and then they have notes in between our keyboard notes, right? So there's quarter tones or half tones, and there's notes that are in between the spots that are important and that they have to have precision with. And so it's a
Wow.
completely different approach to music.
I feel like if we put all those electrodes on your brain, like every part of your brain would be just like like you must use every, how they say like we only use 10% of our brains. I feel like you're using all of it.
I don't know about
Do
that.
you feel like that's true?
It's just fun. I just, like one of the joys in life to me is learning things. Like I don't foresee ever stopping learning.
Right.
you
There's no
know?
destination of like, well, I'm done.
Yeah, and I think it all has value too, whether it's, studying music. It's like some of the stuff that I've gone to study, I have no intention of ever performing that music as it was intended to be performed. It's more about just the joy of learning about that approach and those techniques and those sounds, and taking from that, like respecting the tradition and the culture, by learning it as to a certain extent,
Mhm.
and then how can I take those things and apply them to what I actually do for a living.
Right. Let's talk about what you do for a living. What is, as I know you're a busy, busy guy, what's I know you're home in Austin now, right?
This week.
Yay. This week. What's like a typical, what's chunk of time? Let's just say like a week of time. Like what's that like for you?
It all depends, and it changes every week.
How do you love that? Is it, I mean, you've been
I-
doing this for a long time. Does that fit with the type of person that you are? And how do you fold in? I mean, you have to have a sense of balance or create that. So how do you do that? Because it sounds super sexy and fun, and you're touring with all these great people, and you're up there and you're playing, and you're so talented. It's ridiculous, actually, how talented you are. So it's all working, but you have to have some balance. So how do you do that?
it's again, I started so young, so touring at 9, going to Europe for a month at a time. And at that time too, like, we didn't have cell phones or internet or anything like that, right?
Back in the
And so
day.
yeah, so it was literally like, the only communication you could have with your family was through writing letters or postcards.
Hmm.
And you would send it, and it would probably take 2 or 3 weeks to get there, so
Yeah.
it's almost like. And but again, like, I started learning things that make touring more enjoyable for me at an early age. And as I've gone on, I've also sort of continued some of those things, and discovered new things that make me comfortable. And so in the choir, like, our schedule was so defined that literally they knew every single meal that we were going to have. Every minute of our day was planned, and they would send people ahead, like a month ahead, to taste every meal that we were going to have, and to
Wow,
make sure that it was a well balanced diet. And yeah, it was like very
that's
intense.
gnarly. Yeah, cool.
And but they would build in things like, we would go, we'd be in Venice, and we'd have a special time where we'd go to see some famous glass blowers and see the beautiful things that they make, and see the process, and
Mhm.
go experience that. Or we'd be in Vienna and go see the Lipizan stallions,
Mhm.
and we'd go to museums, and we'd experience these aspects of the culture, and we would eat the food that was also in the culture. It wasn't like they were just giving us things to make us feel comfortable.
Right.
Another thing back then, like, you had to be careful about drinking the water in these different countries.
Yeah.
If you're in Venice, you're not going to drink the water out of the sink, right?
Mm, mm,
And
mm.
still water was not, you couldn't get bottled still water at that time. Back in the 80s, there was pretty much just like Perrier and you know a couple of other sparkling waters. So I got hooked on bubbly water when I was 9. Right.
I'm like, literally.
Yeah, I discovered a new flavor of Waterloo
What is
yesterday.
that?
It's orange
Orange?
vanilla, so it's like a
Oh,
creamsicle.
oh,
It's
nice.
delicious.
Cheers.
But
Sweet.
yeah, Topo and LaCroix, Waterloo, like, I love that it's also accessible now, because it wasn't for a while. It's only in the last few years that it's become more so. But
Hmm.
I've been drinking that stuff since I was a kid, and when it was just Perrier or Pellegrino.
Yeah.
And but so now when I tour, those are things that I look forward to. I see where my brain is just not very linear, but I like details, and I like to look ahead, and I think about, oh, we have a day off and we're in Oslo. What's cool in Oslo? And this is
Mhm.
an example from last year. We had a day off in Oslo, and so I reached out to some friends. I wanted to find the best coffee. I wanted to eat some good food because I like coffee and food.
Mhm.
I then decided to go to the Monk Museum. The guy who does the Scream, who
Mhm.
it, they had just finished the new Monk Museum maybe like a year before that or less. And it was phenomenal. It was, I had no idea he was so prolific. But then I also kind of charted out like, okay, and then I want to go through the botanical gardens and then go to this like kind of cool area with some shops and that has some good restaurants and, just sort of figuring out and laying out all these things that make it worthwhile. Because sometimes when you're on tour, it is just you're on a tour bus, then you go to a hotel, and then you go to the venue, and then you go take a nap in your bunk, and then you play the show, and then you get back on the tour bus, and then you drive, and then you wake up in some town and you're not sure where you are.
Yeah.
So you have to find ways of, for me personally, is like, how can I really experience these places and seeing friends? If I have friends in those places, I like to go meet a friend for coffee or lunch or whatever.
Yeah.
And by having those things to look forward to aside from just the music, I mean, I feel so fortunate to be able to tour and play music for a living, but having those added elements makes it that much more enriching and things to look forward to. So the food, the cultural experiences of the different cities,
Mhm.
um, and then other things like I travel with my pillow, you know, sleep sleep on the same pillow every night that I do at home too. And
Nice.
and having that,
Important.
yeah, having that consistency of something like that is also important. If I'm on a bus and I'm in a bunk and I still have my pillow and it smells like my pillow and it feels like my
Mhm.
pillow, same thing. And then hotel, hotel, hotel. It's like having that, I've learned, for me, is something that helps me sleep better and helps just the whole flow of everything.
Yeah.
And there's other little bits like that, like if have certain smells that you like essential oils or
Yes.
candle or
Yes. So powerful smell is for me, and that tactile thing too. Like I'm like that too when I travel. Like I have a blanket that I've had since I was like early 20s. It's like a member of the family.
for sure.
And I gotta have it, like, because that's, yeah, yeah. I'm glad you do that for yourself because I can imagine it would get a bit grueling, you know?
It can, yeah. Um I don't really party or anything like that, so like that isn't really an issue for me. I'm not waking up hungover. It's like
Right.
I'm waking up and I'm like,
What do you
oh,
want to
is there a
do?
museum I can catch today? Or, without being annoying to
I know
people. But
everyone's like, ugh.
yeah, no, I'll always invite anyone that wants to come along. Like for example, last year we were touring through US with Hayes and one of the cities we stopped in was in San Francisco. And my favorite chocolatier, I'm a huge chocolate person. I love chocolate. And I try it all over the world. And 20 some years ago, around maybe less, 15 to 20 years ago, I discovered Ricciuti chocolates in the Bay Area in San Francisco and found out later that the uh, the namesake, Michael Ricciuti, is also a drummer. And,
Ooh.
and his chocolate is, but I found this out like maybe 4 or 5 years after, like, I compare like every chocolate around the world to this chocolate. And
Wow.
then I was talking to somebody at the shop at the Ferry Building one day, and they're like, "Oh, Michael's like." They're like, "Oh, what are you doing in town?" Or what. And I discovered he was a drummer, and so I left him a shaker from some of the shakers that I've designed for Swan Percussion,
Yeah.
and a note, and he didn't find it for years, right?
What?
It would just like they left it and it was like piled in his office, and then he was cleaning his office one day and he discovers the shaker and the note, and then he looks me up, and then it turns out he's a fan of some of the people I play with, and then he starts going through all this stuff. So he reaches out and sends me an email, and he's like, "Hey, I just found, I don't know when you left it, but it was literally years." And um, but then he was like, "Let me know next time you're coming through." And so now every time I go through San Francisco, like I go hang out, we grab dinner, and but I haven't had time until last year to go take a tour of his lab and the factory where all the chocolate is made.
Oh, wow.
And so, wake up on the bus and we're already at the venue. I don't have anything to do till 3 p.m. or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I was like, "Hey guys, anybody want to come to the chocolate factory with me?"
Like, zip it, Charlie.
Yeah, so a lot of people were tired, and a couple came along
Oh,
and
good.
had a great day, and I got to see like the whole process and got to ask all these questions, and it was great. And Michael has become a really good friend of mine over the years now, but to finally have a chance to go see this place, which is just like magical to me, like chocolate is like there's so much precision in like the
Seriously?
craft of making chocolate. Oh yeah, like the temperatures that you have to keep things at,
Oh,
um when it's cooling off, and like it's so precise with a lot of stuff, and super fascinating. I loved it.
have you ever been to in Santa Fe, there's a place that's really cool. I'm not a huge crazy like chocolate person, but there's a place in Santa Fe that is, I guess it's pretty well known. I don't know, I don't remember what it's called, but they are like it's drinkable chocolate.
Oh, okay.
And so they serve it to you in these little cups and you literally sip on it. It's almost like a sipping tequila, but a sipping chocolate
In Santa Fe or Santa
in
Cruz?
Santa Fe.
Okay, because I've been to a place in Santa Cruz that
Ooh,
was like that,
really?
but not in Santa Fe. Yes.
Yeah. There's a little place in Santa Fe. And they also make like truffles and things like that for us
Yeah.
mere mortals that are, just beginners. But yeah, I thought that that was interesting. That's for the real people that love chocolate, I would think.
Oh yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
You're like, I gotta
I mean,
get
I
this.
haven't had it in Santa Fe, but I have had the
Yeah.
drinking chocolate in
Yeah.
in Santa Cruz.
You're like, I don't do shots of tequila, I do shots of chocolate.
Right? Yeah.
Let's talk about your latest, well, your debut solo project, my best daydream, faults and flaws. Make sure I get that right. And I love that you put that out on Bandcamp, and that's pretty much the place to go to get that, which I love driving traffic to Bandcamp because it's such a great, I feel like it doesn't get used as much as it should be, you
For
know?
sure.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's such a great, and Bandcamp Friday is actually this Friday on May
Yeah.
5th. Um, so let's talk a little bit about that. What made you get to a place where you were like, I'm gonna put out, my first solo thing? That
Sure.
feels like a big step.
Yes. For sure. And I never had planned on doing that. It
Okay.
I have always been happy playing in bands and working with other people, and I love touring and I love making records, and I've done a lot of both with so many different people in lots of different genres. And
Crazy. Yeah.
I've always been really busy doing it. So I never even thought about doing my own solo project of music. It was never a thing that I thought about. Um, to take a few steps back, uh, leading to how we got, how it came about.
Yeah.
Um, so I've also created a bunch of instruments, and I have a company, Swan Percussion and Fat Congas, and then I've also created stuff for other companies that I endorse and have patents in the drum field.
Mm.
In 2019, we were moving. the Swan Percussion and Fat Congas into a new, bigger facility in Wimberley, Texas. I was out on tour and I get a call that everything burned to the ground. So I hadn't even been into the new place and it was just gone. Everything.
Oh no.
All the physical stuff
Mhm.
gone in an instant.
Wow.
And so then I finished tour and then start thinking like, okay, well, what what's my plan now? Like we have to, either start again from scratch. Still had the intellectual property, patents and trademarks and stuff like that, um, and plenty of ideas. So started approaching other companies about the possibility of licensing or purchasing either or both of the brands. And that was sort of late 2019 going into early 2000, and then the
And then we
pandemic
knew what
hit.
happened.
Yeah. And while guitars and pro audio and things like that sold more than ever during the pandemic, drums, not so much.
Mm,
Nobody wanted to be home with their entire family and somebody bashing away at drums.
makes sense.
Probably would have been good for a lot of mental health around the world,
Yeah.
um, but it wasn't so. So a lot of the companies, um, the drum market was sort of eviscerated. Like a lot of companies had to lay off a large percentage of their employees, and the market still hasn't totally recovered to what it was before then. So I kind of had to table that. And as I'm sitting at home and my gigs and tours that were on the calendar start disappearing, and I had my company that I had built over a decade was gone. It's kind
Oh,
of like, what am I going to do with myself? So
yeah.
I decided that I was going to get really into songwriting, which I had done a little bit of before, but not much, and also deeper into production. Like I've spent a lot of time in studios, but I never mixed anything or did like real sound design type stuff, and so I decided I wanted to learn those things and then also pick up some new instruments like the bass and lap steel. So I started taking different classes and I started just working on stuff, and I'm not good at being still. So it's essentially because for the first time in my life I was home for longer than a few weeks, right? And it's
Yeah.
like, whoa, this is crazy. For one, that's crazy for me because I'm used
Yeah.
to constantly being on the move. And then, these things that I had in my life weren't there. So, what can I do that I can control that can be sustainable moving forward? That's on me,
Mm-hmm.
things that I can just create and I can do on my own. And I've always loved songs. I mean, that's even my approach as an instrumentalist and as a side person. It's always about the song and focused on the song. And I love listening to music and hearing good songs, that's
Mm-hmm.
super important to me. And so I wanted to get deeper into the craft of songwriting. And so I started doing some of my own, but I also signed up for a class that was like an online class, and it was based in the UK. And the teachers, it was a year-long thing, and the teachers were based in Europe, not over here. And my thinking was, I can do this work as a student and I can be really bad. I can write lots of terrible stuff and none of my friends have to hear it. Right? But these people that are teaching are people that are highly respected. They're just not in my peer group over here in the US,
Right. Mm-hmm.
And then if I got good, maybe they would want to be my friends. you know. And it worked. And I had one of the teachers really decided to sort of take me under her wing, and she started introducing me to other songwriters over here that she was friends with.
Mm-hmm.
And she also said to me, "You're an artist, and you need to put out your own record. And I was like, what? But she's like, no, you are already an artist, and you're already writing songs that I would buy and listen to, and you have a cool voice, and you should make your own record.
Mm.
And I had literally never had that thought in my life. And so then I was like, okay, well, I've got time. so so I
Wow.
started writing a bunch, and then I started focusing my writing in like a certain style for a record. I
Mhm.
ended up with enough for a couple of records, so I have stuff on the back burner that will be on the next My Best Daydream record.
Mm.
And so I just did everything in this room. I played all the instruments and recorded it. I wrote the stuff or co-wrote with other people, um, and uh, mixed it, did everything here. I had I've had interns for quite some time from Texas State University,
Mhm.
and even through the pandemic, I had an intern from Texas State. So his name is Nick Rundell, and he was here to assist me and help with that process. So it was nice to, because I could go outside and sing something or do something instead of running back and forth. And
Right.
so he was here to help me through some of the process, but otherwise it was just me going through and doing this, building a record, and then I started doing side project stuff too, and some things that haven't come out yet. And I enjoyed it. I really had fun. I love singing and I love playing other instruments. And then suddenly I had a record, and then it was like, well, I guess I need to come up with a name for it, and I should put it out, I guess.
Yeah. How did you come up with My Best Daydream?
So that was it's crazy now because there's so much music put out. And so there are so many band names, and there's so many different names that are taken, and it's really hard. So you think of like, this would be a cool name. Nope, it's already taken,
Yeah.
and I didn't want to use my name because I like to do different projects under different things that aren't necessarily associated with me, because then I'm not stuck in a box. If it's my name, if I put out a record under my name, then the next record has to sound like that too,
Like it
essentially.
fits. Yeah.
Yeah, people expect that. But if I put it under this moniker and that moniker and this one, then I have all these different lanes that I get to play in.
I like that.
And so that was sort of my thinking behind it. But the specific name came from just a song idea that I still have not written this song, but the line was, I lost my best daydream, feels like a nightmare. I'm stuck in the in between, and I know you don't care.
Ooh.
So it's kind of dark.
I like it dark though. I like the pain.
Yeah.
I do. I'm not a big fan of the happy songs. So yeah, I
Yeah.
like the whole thing is great because you do have, it feels like there's a bit of a theme or at least a bit of a reservoir that you're pulling from, with most of the songs.
Oh,
And
for sure.
I like that. I really respond to other people's pain. Sorry. Hopefully you're not still feeling those things.
Oh, and it's a blend of stuff. I mean, some things are, I mean, writing that stuff is cathartic. Like I'd say
Yes.
I'm definitely an optimist in general, and I'm a happy person 90% of the time. Like
Mhm.
in all honesty, like
Same. Mhm.
I am a happy person. Of course I have moments of being sad or depressed or anxiety about things, but in general I'd say that I am a happy person.
Mhm.
But sometimes you have these feelings and these thoughts, and sometimes the music is the best way to put it out,
Absolutely.
and and that's part of it. It's like it's about um it's a catharsis for me, but then hopefully by putting it out, it can be that for someone else too, you know.
Yeah, I think it's important, that when we're listening to music that we kind of have that, oh yeah, that's how I feel too. Like that's the other me too, like
For sure.
yeah, like that I think that's would you say that it's one of the tenets of maybe why we listen to music that has words?
I so the entire reason that I do what I do can be I can pinpoint an experience in a moment that
Mm.
that happens, and it goes back to the choir. we used to we performed these pieces called the Butterfly, and they were poems that were written by Jewish children in Theresienstadt, Czechoslovakia, which Terezin, Theresienstadt, was a camp
Mhm.
during the Nazi Germany, where they put children and they put artists and musicians. And there was a collection of poems that had been found, and the conductor Fletcher Wolf had somebody compose music to these poems. His name was Robert Schiff, and he composed these specifically for the Atlanta Boy Choir. And we performed these pieces all around the world. And the conductor thought that it was very important that we keep that in the forefront, and that people remember that that happened.
Yeah.
And we would perform it in Germany and Austria and these places, and he would talk about it and say how important it is to put this out
Yeah.
and to remind people. And the title piece, the Butterfly, speaks of this boy thinks he sees a butterfly and then realizes it's just sunlight hitting off of a rock or something. And then the refrain is, only I never saw another butterfly, only I never saw another butterfly, only I never saw another butterfly.
Mm.
And it's pretty intense stuff. As a kid, you sing these pieces, and you don't have a total connection to it. You're singing the words and you're just trying to do it right and perform it. Well, one year we toured in Eastern Europe, and it was when the wall was still up and it was still, USSR. And we went to Czechoslovakia, and we were in Prague, and we took a trip to Theresienstadt, and there was a museum there, and we got to see where those children that wrote those poems lived and died,
Yeah.
and the space that they were in, and it's one of those places that you feel it. There's some really I don't know. Sometimes you get a sense of a place that's old and has a certain history to it. And I've been to a few former camps like that, and I've been to some of the slave forts in Western Africa, and it's the same feeling. It's a lot of darkness to me. That
Heavy.
very heavy. Like you feel it in your chest,
Yeah.
and it's a powerful experience, and puts things in a different perspective. And you can, I can't even imagine the horrors that people went through, but being in those spaces gives you just a glimpse and enough of it to realize how intense it is.
Yeah.
And so we're there, and suddenly, things start having a different meaning. Those songs start to take a different form, and in my perception. And then we performed in Prague the next night, and we were in an old cathedral. And I remember it was so packed. Like, we would normally, if we were in some sort of church or cathedral, we'd process down the aisles and then go up. And so it's so filled with people. And this is back when it was, still communist, and just a very different landscape than what it is now. and people are sitting in the aisles and on the floor, and we're stepping over them to get up there, and it's just crowded and different, and not what we're used to. But I remember that performance being as close to perfect as anything I've ever done. I
Mm.
remember everyone was in sync, and the symbiotic relationship with the audience was very powerful and very intense. And afterwards, we're getting onto the tour buses, and there's all these older people like trying to give us flowers, and they're crying, and they're like grabbing at us and stuff, and it's kind of weirds us out as a bunch of young kids, like.
Yeah.
So we get back on the bus, and then some of the chaperones come on to say, like, hey, we know that was kind of, a
A
little,
lot.
yeah, just like intense with those people like coming up. But we wanted to let you know those were survivors of Theresienstadt.
Wow.
Yeah. And even, even now, just talking about it, it's like, um,
Did you get back off the bus and say hi or and
no,
no?
no, they were, pretty, a lot of security and discipline and stuff. Like
Yeah.
it would have been too much chaos to deal with that. But realizing what it meant to those people by singing those songs and having experienced being in that space, my mom later related to me that the following time in Atlanta when we performed those pieces, she said you could see all the boys that had been on that specific tour because we had tears just streaming down our eyes as we sang.
Yeah.
And the choir was so disciplined that, like, if you had an itch, you couldn't scratch it, right? Your arms always had to be by your side, and your eyes had to stay on the conductor. And if one of those things didn't, if you weren't doing that and your posture wasn't perfect, then like you're out, like
Yeah.
highly disciplined. And so, I don't remember that, but I was like, oh, was I crying? And she's like, oh yeah, for sure. Like, and so we're just still singing perfectly, but just like tears just rolling down our eyes. And flash forward, uh, when I was about 21, 22, something like that, and just trying to figure out, I had done music, but I had done other things, and was trying to figure out what to do with my life.
Mm.
And I went to a performance of the choir with my parents,
Mm.
and uh, the conductor starts introducing the butterfly pieces and talking about it, how he did, and then he starts talking about that tour.
Oh wow.
And then the first note they hit, I just started bawling,
Yeah.
like huge emotional release.
Yeah.
And in that moment, I was like, that's what I'm chasing the rest of my life,
Mm.
is that music can heal, it can bring joy, it can bring catharsis, it can be an outlet, it
Mm.
creates memories, we associate it with so many things that can tie into it.
Yeah.
And I feel like my purpose is to facilitate that through what I do. And
Mm.
if I can give even the slightest amount of what it has given to me,
Mm.
um, then that's worth pursuing, you know?
I mean, I couldn't have said it better. Yeah. I feel like you are fully living that and fully and lucky to be able to, really be doing this for your livelihood and
For
doing it
sure.
with such the heart that you have. We're so lucky that all that kind of is lining up for you so we can receive that.
Yeah, it's I do not take it for granted in the least. I feel so fortunate that that I get to do this, and the people that I get to do it with, and the level of creative freedom that I'm given by those that I work with,
Mhm.
and having the ability to do that brings me a lot of joy, and I think that translates from the stage as well, and at least I hope it does.
It does.
But I, I don't. I remember and I think about that. I don't, if I catch myself at a gig and I'm like, oh, the catering is terrible today, I'm like, did I really just say that? Did I really just complain about like, this is so amazing that like I
Yeah.
get to travel around the world with my friends playing music that I love, and being creative and making records and like
Mm.
how do I have a right to complain about anything, It's like,
Well, you are human and you're allowed to have your moments.
yeah. I mean, it happens, but I catch myself pretty quickly usually,
Mhm.
like I've spent time busking in the subways and performing for a single homeless person, right? Like me and
Mm.
my buddy Dan, we have a band called Porter Davis.
Mhm.
Eventually, we had a third member join us, Simon. But Dan and I started in the subways of Boston, and the
Nice.
two subway stations we played in the most were Porter Square and Davis Square, and
Cool.
that's where we developed our sound. And I, you weren't allowed to have drums, so I had to come up with things that weren't drums. And
Like a bucket?
well, so I had a friend in college that was from Peru, and he was from Chile, and he made me a cajon, which is the wooden box drums that are now everywhere. But at that time, you couldn't find them in the U.S. It was a traditional Peruvian instrument that you'd see in Peru and Chile, and maybe in Spain and flamenco music. But I was like, oh, I could play regular beats on this thing in the subway, and it's just a box. Right. And then I would take shakers and tambourines and I'd put bells on my ankles, and I just came up with different ways of creating sounds that were similar to drum set sounds that we would have in Western music, but they didn't look like drums, and so it wasn't technically drums, and so I
Right.
could play them in the subway. So
Right.
that's one of the ways that I developed a lot of my sort of hybrid percussion stuff, was from busking in the subway 4 or 5 days a week, early in
Wow.
the morning before class. And but we'd have the experience of literally sometimes it's like 6:30 in the morning and you have one person watching you, and it's someone who's homeless.
Mm.
And we had experiences where homeless people would literally give us the only change that they have in their pocket and would
What?
tip us, and or they would have a newspaper and like give us a newspaper, or I remember one time a guy offered us some Listerine,
Huh.
and it was like what he had.
Wow.
Like, hey, you want a sip of
Hot on the streets. It's a hot commodity.
yeah, but it was it was very humbling, to see these people who had essentially nothing, and that music meant that much to them,
Wow.
that they would offer what they did have, because they, sometimes they might stay there for a couple hours listening to us, and it was really wonderful to have that connection and to meet people. I still have friends today that I met from playing in the subways,
Wow.
and so you have that, and then there's the thrill of playing in front of 75,000 people, or being on TV playing for millions, and they are such extremely different things, but to me they both have just as much value.
Yeah.
It's
I
all
was gonna
about
say, does it feel this, do you feel like you're the same in both of those situations? Do you feel like I feel like the answer is yes. Like I feel like you give just as much busking as you do, on a taping of ACL live or something like that. Does that feel true?
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I you know, sometimes you have off nights, and you know, it might be difficult to like find your way in,
Sure.
but uh but there are techniques that I've developed to bring that about when I feel that I'm not in that place. But the vast majority of the time, it really doesn't matter to me what the audience is, because if there's one person there and
Mhm.
I have the ability to connect with them in some way, then I'm gonna do that. I'm not into phoning things in, as they say. Like, I'm not capable of that. Like, I am in the moment, whatever that moment is, and if I find myself getting out of it, then I'll close my eyes and imagine myself in another moment that I remember
Mm.
or that I project in order to get back into that place in the actual moment, in the reality. Um, we had a we had an old tour manager with my band Porter Davis, who used to say to us, and he worked with all kinds of different folks over the years, but he had a saying that he would say to us every night before we went on stage. He said, 10 or 10,000 leave nothing behind.
Yeah.
And I really love that concept. You know,
Yeah.
it's whether it's 10 people or 10,000 people,
Yeah.
go out there and give it your all.
Yeah. I think it's Darden Smith. Do you know Darden?
I do.
Who says if you're a musician, you are in the service industry, something to that effect. And I think that's very true. It sounds like you hold that as a mantra as well.
Yeah, for sure. It's, you know, when I'm on stage, my job is to make memories and to entertain people, and whatever it is within the context of the songs, you know, can change. Like, it could be something that's cathartic or uplifting, you know, a lot of different possibilities, but my job is to deliver those things and to do it authentically and to be there in that moment. And especially with live music, it's like, to me, if I'm doing something live, it's a different thing that doesn't translate through just listening to the song on the radio or being across on a screen. And why is that? And what can I do to enhance that? You know?
Right.
And like you said before in the beginning, seeing me pick up different things and like not just playing drums, but also adding in these different elements. And there is the sonic aspect of it, but there's also the visual aspect of it. And I'm very aware that there are people who are like, oh, what's he going to pick up next? Or, oh, what is that thing that he's doing?
Yeah, because the reason I remember you and the reason I think I started following you is because you made something out of bottle caps or something. And Hayes was like, when I think when he was doing the introductions and you maybe did a little solo or whatever, and he made a funny comment that you had like just made something.
Right.
And I was like, that's so freaking cool. And then I was like, that's interesting to me. Like that pulls me into not only who you are on stage, but then I want to know more about that guy. I want to know like how his mind works. And I'm so glad I did, because now here we are.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
It started as
Totally.
just a concert and an Instagram follow. And I remember we both were like, we love our pour over coffee.
Yeah,
We love
right.
we bonded over all that stuff. But that's a perfect thing to make the point of, yeah, you just never know who's, because people are looking, they're watching, and they're there because they want to be somewhere in person and they want to know more about you guys up there. So you're doing it, you're totally dialed into like, what it should be. These lights drive me crazy. Blind.
Well, you know, I do the best that I can, and it's a constant evolution and an experimental process, you know. And again, playing in the subways, like we learned that no one has to listen to you, no one has to tip you, no one has to sign up on your email list or purchase a CD. Like, how do you create that, And when Dan and I first did it, it was to promote shows that we were playing with a full band. So we would go in as a duo, but we wanted to like promote local club shows.
Mm.
And so I had the idea. I was like, hey man, let's go busk in the subway. And he was like, all right, if you'll get up that early, I will too. So and he was teaching in a Montessori school, and I was in school in college, and so we'd get up at like 5 in the morning, and I'd meet him there at 6 in the morning, and we would start up at 6:30, and we had a clipboard with an email list out, and we'd make up handbills for the show and put out a tip thing and maybe some CDs, and just try to get let people know about the show, and sign up on our email, maybe sell some CDs. And that first show, he asked on the mic, like, how many of you saw us on the subway? And it was like probably 50-60% of the people.
Oh, that's amazing.
And it was packed, and it was like, oh, that worked. So we kept doing it.
Yeah.
And we learned how to be entertaining. Any sort of street performer has to learn how to get your attention.
Mm-hmm. And I would say even more than that, after you get their attention, you have to keep it by them caring. And that's where I think at the end of the day, nobody has to care about you.
Nope.
In any conversation, in any facet of life.
100%.
And when you realize that, life, well, I mean, like that's a tough thing to realize, right? But once you do, and you kind of are okay with that understanding, then I think is when you start to really walk in the truth. And then I think every step you take inside of that lane can be probably exponentially more productive, like you guys did. Like you were in the lane of the intention is to get people to notice you and then care enough to actually come to a show. I mean, it's quite brilliant,
Yeah. And you have to, and you only have so much time too, because the train is coming. So you got a couple of songs, max.
Oh yeah, the train.
And then what happens was, then people started giving us the feedback that, hey, we enjoy the full band show, but we only get to see 2 or 3 songs of what you guys do in the subway, and that's really cool, and I'd love to see a whole show of that.
Oh,
cool. So that's when we decided to play a show of just the 2 of us at the same size clubs that we were selling out as a 6-piece band.
Oh, nice.
And we still sold it out, and people loved it even more. And so we were like, oh.
And what did you tell yourselves as to why? Why did people love it the same or more?
I think it was because of the specialness of that format, and that it was something different, and it was more interesting, and it wasn't just a band with drums and bass and guitar, and it was like, oh, here's these 2 guys, and they're kind of this interesting, weird, quirky percussion. And again, like, that was at a time when cajones did not exist. I never saw another person play a cajon for years, touring all over the country. I had my little setup. I think the first person I ran into was my friend Mona, who plays in a band called Raining Jane, and they play with Jason Mraz. And Mona and I had kind of developed our own things on the cajon that were strikingly similar. And we played on a bill together at a college, and we're like, oh, hey, look, here's somebody else doing the same thing. And like every venue I went to, I had to, like, people are like, what is that? How am I supposed to mic that? Is that just a box? And I'm like, it's called a cajon. It's spelled CAJON. Here's how we're gonna mic it. I brought my own mic. Like, it was this educational process every time. And now you could go to any venue in the world and you pull one out, and they're like, oh, okay, a cajon. you know.
Mhm.
But back then that didn't exist, so it was there was a novelty aspect to it as well, you know, is like, oh, I've never seen anybody play anything like that, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
and and yet it still sounds, it's not so far out that it's not within the palette of what people feel comfortable with, so you're stretching the boundaries a little bit but not too much, you know.
Right. 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 That's so cool. Um, do you have more? I know you have more songs from My Best Daydream. What are your plans for releasing maybe the next one, the next volume or
Yeah, I'm hoping this year I'll have some time to start recording. I have no hard set goals as to when that happens, and I also want to start playing more live shows. Like
Yes.
I I did a tour with my buddy Ryan Montbleu, who's a great singer songwriter from the Northeast,
Hmm.
and so I did my first tour with him. He was playing solo and I opened solo, and then I'd sit in with him a bit playing percussion because I've played on a bunch of his records and stuff, and and that was interesting because he gave me a 45-minute opening set,
Woo.
and I had never played acoustic guitar standing up through a PA in front of people before, right?
Right. How did
And
that feel?
it was awesome once I did it. But
Terrifying before that, but
yeah, well, working up to it, like I set up a PA in my living room, and anytime I had a chance when I was home, I would rehearse and
Mhm.
practice, like plugged in, singing with the microphone, standing up with a guitar, doing the thing. And I practiced all my stories, and I wrote,
Mm.
like, how am I going to intro this song? Where am I going
Mm.
to tell a joke? Like, I've learned that people who are really great at that, it's it's repetition and it's stuff that's worked out. Like Hayes is a great storyteller and has jokes, and I see the evolution of it, of
Yeah.
he's kind of worked things out and then it gets refined through performance, and then it's kind of the thing, and then when he feels that he's done it enough, he gets rid of that and there's a new one and there's a new
Right.
record, and so there's new stories that come in, and it's really engaging for people and it's a big part of the show. And
Yeah.
so I wanted to make sure that when I played live, it wasn't just song, 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 song. Hey, my name's Mike. Song, song, song. You know? Like, because when I see that, I'm not entertained. Like, I check out
Right.
myself. So I wanted to make sure that it was a blend of here presenting my songs, but also telling stories that were sometimes about the songs and sometimes about me and how I got into this place, and so that by the end of the show, hopefully you know a bit more about my personality, my sense of humor, my
Mhm.
backgrounds, and uh and also where some of the song ideas came from, you know. So I worked on all of that. Like, it was not uh haphazard in the least.
Yeah.
So that the first moment I was on, the first show was in New Orleans, and you know, I here's another thing is, again, from doing this my whole life, I do not have the slightest bit of stage fright or nervousness. Like, it is the most comfortable place in the world for me.
Mm.
I have anxiety going to a house party
Mhm.
and having to talk to strangers like that,
Ah,
you know,
yeah.
that makes my stomach nauseous and my chest tight. Like, you know, I certainly have anxiety in life, but it is not on stage. You put me on a stage with some instrument in my hand, I'm like golden, you know,
Mm.
especially if it's, oh, I have to play drums. Doesn't matter how many TV cameras there are, or how big the audience is, or how famous the person is that's I'm up there with. Like, most comfortable place.
Wow.
It is like sleeping on my pillow, you know, that I carry with me everywhere.
Like, in fact, I have my pillow
Yeah,
in
but
my
it is
kitchen.
such a comfortable thing for me, and so here I am playing guitar and singing my songs, which feels very vulnerable. And so leading up to it, like the couple months before when I'm rehearsing, I'm getting ready, I'm like, am I going to be nervous when I get on stage? Like, am I going to shake? Am I going to, feel that tension? Am I going to mess up because I go blank and I don't know what's going on and I'm so nervous? Like, I
Yeah.
was like, and I was kind of excited about that. I was like, maybe this is going to happen because don't, I seek that feeling because I haven't felt it, you
Yeah.
know, even, and it's just not part of my, it's just not part of my life, and so I was curious as to like, is this going to happen? And even leading up to like right before I got on stage, I'm like nervous about being nervous, right? Like I felt nerves. And then as soon as I like start playing, I'm like, oh yeah,
Uh,
this is what I do. Right? Like so I had no nerves through the whole first set. I just did the set, and part of it was I was prepared for it,
yeah.
but I didn't. It was just like, oh yeah, this is my comfort zone, and it doesn't really matter what I'm doing up here. You could just throw me on a stage and have me talk, and I'm probably just gonna get up there and talk and feel totally fine. Like it doesn't make me nervous, you know.
Interesting.
It was super interesting for me because I thought surely doing this new vulnerable thing,
Yeah.
I might have those feelings, and I had feelings about possibly having those feelings.
Yeah.
But then as soon as I was on stage, it was just, this is what I do.
Autopilot. Yeah. Well, I'm so glad you do what you do. I wish we had more time to talk. We didn't even get to talk about your magic and
Oh yeah.
sleight of hand. And you and I will have to
Hypnosis.
hang out and go see some music. We'll talk about it.
Yeah, well, I plan on eventually I want to start implementing that stuff into what I do musically as well.
Oh, that'd be so cool.
I have a couple pieces that I've done at festivals and different performance spaces. So I already have some material, but I want to add that in and start
Oh,
having my shows not just be a presentation of songs, but also adding elements of magic and different things that I'm also passionate about. So
I know. I definitely want to talk to you about it. I'm very interested in all of that stuff. It's very cool. Well, we are gonna have to say goodbye this time, but we'll have you back, I'm sure, as your next body of work comes out. But thank you so much for coming on. It's really
yeah,
special.
thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks so much for having me.
of course, of course. All right. Well, can we shout out to, are you playing in Austin anytime soon-ish or the
Uh,
area?
The next thing I have in Austin is, well, May, let's see, May 20th.
Hmm.
I'm out at Cherokee Creek, which is maybe like an hour and a half away. It's a festival, Cherokee Creek Festival. And that's with Hayes Carll, and we'll be there with Lyle Lovett as well, and some other great folks. And
Awesome.
and then June 10th, my band Porter Davis will be at the Saxon Pub.
I love the Saxon. Well, that's where I saw you last, actually.
Yep,
Just
yeah,
so
it's a great
happened to
spot.
sit at my table. I was like,
Yeah, so random.
so random in such a small world. I love it though. Awesome. Well, we will be sure to promote that over here in this world. And I'm sure I'll see you around,
For sure.
run into you.
Yeah,
So, all right. Well, thanks to Mike Meadows for stopping by and hanging out with us. And this does it for this episode of the Austin Downbeat. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next time.